Okay, so you should have in the chat, you have the source sheet. All right, and off we go. So let me read you the question. And then there are actually probably more sources for tonight than at the previous 3 classes. All right, some are source heavy, some are not. Certainly nothing wrong with being source heavy. The question is as follows. It is from a religious woman, which makes sense given the question. She has 5 boys and 2 girls. That's a handful. Kol hakavod, absolutely. Her husband also works very hard. But as she writes, this is her question, so we're going to faithfully quote it. He is not there to defend himself, this poor guy. He neglects the responsibility of raising his children religiously. He goes to shul, but he doesn't care if his kids come. Right? Can't be bothered. Doesn't ask how school is. He is tired. He has no patience. And he says to his wife, you do it. And she wants to know, do I have a chiyuv, right? And I'm assuming this is a religious family where the answer maybe impacts. Do I have a chiyuv? Is it my obligation to be mechanech my children? Right? Is the mother's obligation in chinuch, or is it the father's? And if it's the father's, she can go back to the husband and say, "It's not my problem; it's your problem, and you should get on it." I'll say from the outset, I'm not sure that's the best way to deal with this issue in the house. I'm not sure. So the rabbi said, "You're a bum and you should do this." Might not be effective. Yes.
Even if it's not her obligation, could she still accept the agency?
He told her to do it.
Yes. I read that into the tone as I would imagine he would say it. Right. I read that in. No, listen, the question is, there's certainly nothing wrong, right, with a woman raising her children properly, right? It's certainly not only nothing wrong, but it's meritorious and it's fabulous and it's wonderful and all of those things. This is a more specific question, right? Whose halachic obligation is it to be mechanech the children? Right? Again, it does not preclude the opportunity to do so and the meritorious nature of doing so. Okay, right. What does the intuition say? Right, intuitively you would think,
Yes.
of course. Right. I mean, I would think so.
Except that. What if she doesn't really know?
So that's a separate issue, right? One is the primary.
Why would you obligate someone and then not give them the preparation for that obligation? So I'm turning around.
Right.
You're obligating them to do them. You're not obligating them to daven. Not
Right,
obligating them to learn. You're not obligating certain mitzvahs that they're supposed
Right.
to teach it.
Yeah.
Or oversee it.
Right.
Right. So that's a fair question, right? Is it, and right, Eve's question is, right, how can you expect, if you're going to tell a woman she's exempt from Talmud Torah, she's not exempt from prayer, but maybe from mitzvah A, B, and C, then how do you expect then to go ahead and obligate her in teaching her children that? So then the question is a fair question. The question is chinuch teaching the child or ensuring that the child learn? Right? Most parents who excel in chinuch of their children are not necessarily the ones that teach them Torah. Right? I mean, so you can certainly have that split where you're obligated to ensure that it happens, but you yourself don't do it. So if you look here at the sources, let's look at the source sheet. The first thing he does, by the way, is he says you should remind your husband of his responsibility. All right, that's the first point he makes, which again, not sure how effective that will be. All right, and his second line, of course, is right. You should tell your husband you work so hard, but what are you working for if not for this? Right? If all you care about is your job and making money, right, what are you doing? That's certainly a fair point. Again, I don't know if it'll be persuasive, but it is a fair point, right? This is certainly raising children properly is, right, part of one's life mission and shouldn't take a backseat to being too tired from making money. The sources do seem to indicate, although we'll see at the end it's not so clear, a simple reading of the sources do seem to indicate that a woman is exempt. Okay? Even though I agree with Steve that intuitively we should say, right, she has given birth to these children, she is raising these children. Now, back in the old days was probably the primary raiser. Today, hopefully, it's more of a joint effort. But she certainly has a big, strong hand in raising the children. She should be obligated in making sure the children are being raised properly. That being said, let's take a look at, we'll take a look at the sources, and then we'll see how we can read them to accommodate a position that the woman is obligated in the chinuch of her children. So the first source is the Gemara in Kiddushin. This section of Kiddushin talks about the mitzvah of kibbud av va'em. That's actually where you find the analysis and discussion of kibbud av va'em is here in the Gemara in Kiddushin. All right, and the Mishnah says as follows: Kol mitzvos haben al ha'av. Right, any of the mitzvos of the son onto the father. We'll see what the Gemara is going to define that in a moment. Right? Anashim chayabim v'nashim pturos. Men are obligated, women are exempt. V'chol mitzvos ha'av al habein. All of the mitzvos of the father onto the child. Echad anashim ve'echad nashim chayabim. So in that case, both men and women are obligated. Right? Then v'chol mitzvos asei shazman grama. Time-bound positive commandments. Anashim chayabim v'nashim pturos. Men are obligated, women are exempt. Right, b'chol mitzvahs aseh shelo azman grama, all positive non-time-bound commandments. Echad hanashim, echad hanashim chayavim, both men and women are obligated. B'chol mitzvahs lo sa'aseh, all negative commandments, right, whether they're time-bound or not, both men and women are obligated, with the exception of one's payas and the kohanim being metame l'mesim, becoming right impure, having contact with a corpse. Daughters of Kohanim are not, there's no prohibition on the daughter of a Kohen from becoming Tameh, and there is no prohibition of cutting your payas or cutting one's payas if you are a woman. Right? Payas is, even if she was to have a beard. Okay. No, I'm not sure how else do you have payas, right? Right? In the circus, they have women with beards, and she's allowed to shave her payas. Okay. So that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara wants to know, right? What is, we have mitzvos haben al ha'av, right? The son onto the father and the father onto the son. What does that mean? What are we referring to? So the Gemara asks, "My kol mitzvos haben al ha'av." Right? Ilema. Right? This is again the father onto the son.
No, otherwise, the son onto the
Sorry, son onto the father. Right. Okay. Ben alav. Thank you. Ilema kol mitzvos demechayiv bra leme'evel la'aba. If this is the mitzvos that the son is obligated to do to the father, then the Gemara asks nashim peturos. Right. Women are going to be exempt. Right. The Tanya we learn in the Brisa ish. Right. Ainli ella ish isha minayin. Right? How do we know that a woman is obligated in these things? Shu omer ish imo ve'aviv tirau. Right? Harei kan shnayim. Right? Tirau is in plural. Right? So it's not just ish that is obligated in fearing their parents. It is both man and woman have a identical obligation to their parents. And therefore, mitzvos haben al ha'av cannot mean it is the son's obligation to do towards the father, because then women would be obligated as well, right? Therefore, Amar Rav Yehuda, Hachik Amar Rav Yehuda says this is what it means. Kol mitzvos haben, all of the mitzvos the son has to perform, hamutelas al ha'av la'asos libno, right? That the obligation is on the father to do for his son. Anashim chayavim v'nashim pturos. Men are obligated, women are exempt. Now, what are those examples? So Tanina laha l'tana Rabbanan, right? We have this teaching ha'ab chayav bivno limulo. The father is obligated to circumcise his child, right? Usually we assign agency because
We're done, right?
yeah, that's probably a good idea in most cases. Lifdoso to do a pidyon haben, lalamdo Torah to teach him Torah, lahasio isha to marry him off, ulalamdo umnos to teach him a profession. All right, that is explicit in the Gemara. You must teach your child a profession so they can earn money. All right, we have selective Gemara readings at times. V'yesh omrim. Af lahashito b'mayim, that he has to learn how to swim in the water. Right, that's an interesting one. Ruthie Sher actually told us once that there was still on the books when she was in Columbia that you had to be able to swim off Manhattan Island to graduate Columbia University.
Harvard University used to have a requirement that every student took swimming.
Yeah,
Really?
because of what's his name, Harry Widener, who died in the Titanic, and his mother said, "I'll
Yes.
pay for your library, but
Uh,
every
uh,
student
Everybody
must
has
learn how
to
to swim."
swim.
Right? And the Gemara, there's an
Yeah.
opinion in the Gemara that you have to
Yeah.
teach your children how to swim. All right, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol she'ena malamin has beno umdus malamdo listos. If you don't teach your child a profession, you teach him to be a thief. Listos salkadaitach. You're not really teaching your child to open locks and break into people's houses. Ella ki'ilu melamdo listos. It's as if you are teaching him to steal. I like that English word. I can't even pronounce it. Brigand. I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce it in English, but that means to steal, right? Liston is like gazela. It is thievery. That's a fancy English word that means something like that. Right, so now from this Gemara, it seems like the obligation is on the father, the women are exempt. Does that have a relevancy to our discussion of chinuch?
It's specified Talmud Torah,
It's
right?
It does. So Eve is hung up on identifying chinuch with Talmud Torah.
It's a component.
1,000%. But
but yeah,
let's take
well,
let's take a step back then and define
look at the
chinuch.
other types of chinuch, including a profession, right?
No, I mean, so let's take a step back and we say that we have an obligation in the chinuch of our children. What does that mean? Does it mean create a Jewish household so that they experience a Jewish household? Does it mean make sure they're at the Shabbos table? Does it mean strap them down and beat them if they don't go to their Shabbos meals?
Does it mean setting a good example?
It can mean all of that, right? But it might mean a lot more than simply teaching them Torah, right? Chinuch is, so in a specific sense, when we say chinuch, we mean teaching them about the mitzvos.
Derech Eretz Kadmei Torah. There are many children who can quote Gemaras, Mishnayos, or whatever, but they had terrible midos.
You know what the funny thing is, Sid? I agree with you 1,000%. They can quote you that Mishnah too, and they still have terrible midos.
I know, so it's a package deal.
So
Right.
you're saying.
So she only has to do the first part.
You're saying their parents neglected,
Or yes, or their parents set bad examples, but yes, meaning they're right. Very often, right, nasty children have nasty parents, or spoiled children have parents who spoiled them and didn't teach them to behave properly, to say thank you, to be courteous, right? All of that could be included in chinuch, right? Now, I agree with that 100%, even though in the Gemara, we talk about chinuch, it's
Right.
About obligation and mitzvot, but who's to say that being courteous and having derech eretz isn't a mitzvah, right? I think the same way when I said that we do a disservice to Shabbos by saying that's not Shabbostic, because we make light of it, right? It's more serious. I think when we say, right, they don't have good midos, somehow that's not like a halachic thing. It's just they're not good people. But no, that's part of the halacha, right? I mean, that's part of being a religious Jew is yes, right? It's davening and it's keeping kosher and it's the mikveh, it's all these things, and it's actually being polite and courteous and kind, right? I mean, that's part of being a religious Jew, right? So if that's chinuch, one way to deal with this Gemara is to say, right, how many things are listed here? 6 or 7. What would you say are in common to these 6 or 7? Certainly the first 3 are things that, this is something Eve mentioned before, they're things that men are obligated in and women are not, right? So maybe you have to be in it to win it, like the old lotto commercials. In a similar sense, right? If you want the person who's going to be responsible for mauling their son is the one who he himself is mauled, right? And the others certainly back in the day, right? The one in charge of the money and the dowry and the profession in the times of the Gemara was certainly going to be the father. Right. If that's what this is, we might say, okay, so those 6 things the father has to do, but with regard to everything else, right, women are obligated. Or we say these are specific mitzvah actions, and chinuch is a much larger package that includes your Shabbos table and your home and your derech eretz and all of those things. And therefore, a woman could be obligated in the chinuch. This Gemara doesn't necessarily pose an issue. The next source is actually a little tougher, but we'll see if we can get there too. Okay, look at the next source. This is a Mishnah and a Gemara in Nazir, right? 28b to 29a. Chav Chasam Abayis Chav Tes Amud Aleph. And the Mishnah there has the discussion is: can I make my child a Nazir? Can I decide? Right, I want my kid to be a Nazir. For why? I don't know. But let's say I want to do it. But I think the Zirus was certainly more popular back in the day. Right, there was one Nazir in the 20th century in Yerushalayim. One of the Rav David HaKohen was one of the great students of Rav Kook. He was the Nazir of Yerushalayim. I think he actually was a real Nazir. His son was Rav Shar Yoshev Cohen, who was the chief rabbi of Haifa, was not a Nazir. I think that's a one and done. But he was, again, very close to Rav Kook, and gets a little out of my circles, but apparently a very, very important guy in that world. So the Mishnah says, Ha'ish madir es beno benazir. A man can impose a Nazirite vow on his son. Ve'ena isha maderes es bena benazir. But a woman cannot impose that same vow on her son. And now the Gemara has 2 reasons. Why should that be? Now you see that we don't care about the daughter. Right? We just, that's not up for debate. I'm not sure why, but that's not included in the Mishnah. There's an argument between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So if you look in the Gemara, and you have the English here, this is the last paragraph, bottom of the page, right? It says, Isha in aval Isha lo. That means a man can do, but a woman cannot, right? My time, or what's the reason? Rav Yochanan Amar halacha hi benazir. Right, that is a halacha in Nazir, which means we have no idea it's a tradition. Well, we don't know, but that's the halacha in Nazir. Right, doesn't help us very much, but it's hard to argue on that. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar Reish Lakish, he says in the name of Reish Lakish, right, kedei lechancho b'mitzvos, that the father can do it, and why does he do it? In order to train him in mitzvos. So, ihachi, if that is true, afilu isha nami, a woman should also have the ability to make her son a Nazir so that he learns the mitzvah of Nazir. Ksavar ish chayev lechanech b'no b'mitzvos, ve'ein ha'isha chayeves lechanech es bina. That a man has the obligation to train his son in mitzvos, and a woman does not have that similar obligation. Right? That seems to be right. Seems to answer the question, no?
Being a Nazir, just out of curiosity, is for life the kid would have to be it, or just for a certain time period?
Stam Naziros, the Gemara says, is 30 days. If you are a Nazir Shimsha, right, there's Naziros Olam, which is eternal, permanent Naziros, and then there's Naziros Shimshon, which is like a partial Naziros. You can definitely, if you're a Shimshon, cannot cut your hair, but you are allowed to touch dead bodies because Shimshon massacred. Right, so if you do a Naziros Shimshon, it's
Anyway,
yes, but then they were dead after he hit them, and
Yeah.
I don't know if he moved that quickly or the dead bodies piled up. It's hard to know, right? So though, but regular Nazirus is 30 days, right? Which is funny because the standard period for rehab starts at 30 days for the most part. When you go into a program, 30 days, right? So it's like spiritual rehab in a sense. No, I mean, in a real sense, right? That's part of being a Nazir. At least one interpretation of that Nazir is that you're straying, right? That famous medrash which says, why is Sota and Nazir connected? Because if you see the Sota woman, you got to say, oh, I got to stay away from that, right? So I always thought to myself, I don't know, if I saw a Sota woman, I wouldn't think to go be an adulterer. Like that wouldn't immediately enter my head. It's like, oh, I saw that. I'm going to go like, probably not. I don't think so. I've never seen a Sota woman, but I've also never thought of being an adulterer. So I don't think that would put me over the edge. In which case, what is the message in the Medrash, though? Right? I think what the Medrash is saying is that not everybody who sees the Sota becomes a Nazir. It's the weak one. The one who sees it and then is tempted, that's the person who needs to go be a Nazir and say, all right, I got to reset. And you take 30 days to try and reset. That I think is not the only way to understand the Nazir, but that clearly it has to be the way to understand that medrash, I think. Anyways, all right, so let's jump back. Let's turn the source sheet over. All right, but the primary question in this is, does Rav Yochanan agree to Reish Lakish? Seems pretty clear. The woman is not obligated in chinuch, the father is. Right? He says it straight out. What about Rav Yochanan? Right? Rav Yochanan says, no, it's a halacha in Nazir, which means it has nothing to do with the rest of anything. Okay. Why can the father make his kid a Nazir and the mother can't? Because the tradition says so. Okay. But it's not a precedent for anything else. Or, right, does Rav Yochanan accept Reish Lakish's principle, but he doesn't think that making your kid a Nazir has anything to do with chinuch, right? That's a separate discussion, but maybe he accepts Rav Lakish's principle about chinuch nonetheless. So that's an argument that runs through the Achronim. And if you wanted to say the woman is obligated in chinuch, you'd have to say we hold like Reish Lakish, like Rav Yochanan, and Rav Yochanan argues on Reish Lakish. All right, now let's try and source the opposite, which is that maybe a woman is obligated in chinuch. So look at the first source on the second page. We'll just do it outside. Then I'm going to read the Rashi inside. Right, this is actually the beginning of Maseches Chagiga. So if you are podcasting this year, it should sound hopefully vaguely familiar, even though we're a few months out. Right, that everyone is chayiv in re'iyah, right, and coming to the Beis Hamikdash, and then there's this discussion of the child, how old and young is the child when they're obligated to come, right? And the Mishnah asks, which is a child? Does it have to be on the father's shoulders by hand? But look at Rashi, right? And this is Chaim David Alevi quotes this Rashi to say, right, maybe Rashi thinks a woman is obligated in the chinuch of her children. So listen carefully. This is again Rashi in Chagiga. Ezehu katan, etc. Aval mikan ve'elach, from that time on, right? Once you get past you're too little, afal pisha eno chayav min Torah, even though the child is certainly not obligated from the Torah until they're bar bat mitzvah, hitilu chachamim al aviv ve'al imo. The chachamim place the obligation upon the father and the mother, lechancho b'mitzvos, to train him in mitzvos. Right? Rashi there says, seems very clear, right? This is Rashi, right? I mean, he doesn't need credentials. He's Rashi, and Rashi says that both the father and mother are obligated in the chinuch of their children. What do we see in? Let's go to the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch, which is the next source, says, right? Katan ochal nevelos. What if the child is eating nevelos? Right? The child is eating. Again, a nevela is an improperly shechted animal, which means treif meat, right? Even though treif meat means something else, but it means not shechted meat. So a child picks up from I don't know where a piece of not kosher meat. Ein beis din mitzuvah lahafrisha. The beis din is not obligated to separate him because he's a kid. Aval aviv mitzuvah ligorbo lahafrisha mi'isur d'oraisa. The father has to rebuke the kid and separate him from an isur that is from the Torah, right? Lahachilo biyadayim, to feed the child something which is not kosher, literally feed it to them. Then asur afilu dvarim shasur midivrei sofrim, even if it's only something that's rabbinically prohibited, the chicken parmesan, right? That's a rabbinic prohibition. You cannot actively feed it to your child, even though it's only a rabbinic prohibition. That you can't do. If your child is eating the chicken parmesan, maybe you don't have to stop them. Okay. Right. You can't train them chilul Shabbos, etc. I once had a guy, I told you this story, who had his 2-3-year-old kid pushing the elevator button on Shabbos so that they can go downstairs in their apartment building in Manhattan. And I looked at him, actually it was just Nifter, so we won't use his name. We'll call him Yossi. I said, Yossi, if you want to be Mechal Shabbos, you push the button. Don't train your kid to be Mechal Shabbos. And he looked at me like, are you out of your mind? And I looked at him, I said, no. I said, don't train your kid to do this. You want to do this, do it. But don't train your child to violate Shabbos. And then at least for that one Shabbos, the kid didn't push the elevator button. I don't know what happened the next Shabbos, but I actually think that's right? Your kid is not your Shabbos guy. Don't train him to be Mechal Shabbos. You want to be Mechal Shabbos, you shouldn't do it, but you do it. Don't make your kid do it, right? So that's here also, right? You shouldn't train. All right, what is that? Seems like it's the father and not the mother, right? The father is obligated in the chinuch, not the mother. And the Magen Avram, right? Avram Gumbiner, one of the primary commentaries to Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim, says, Aviv mitzuvah, his father is obligated, but Aval imo einu mitzuvah, his mother is not. V'chein hu b'nazir daf chavtes, and that's what it says in the Gemara Nazir, which we just read. That's the opinion of Reish Lakish in the Gemara. Woman is not obligated in the chinuch of her children. And then he references the story in the Gemara of Heleni Hamalka, who put her children in the sukkah. She was very machmir, but that's not for regular people. Okay, if you were to look though in the Mishnah Berurah, right, he first quotes essentially the Magen Avram's position. If you look on the second line in the Mishnah Berurah where you see the Gimel, it says v'yesh me'achronim shesovrim the mitzvahs chinuch mutal gam al ha'em. Right, that the mitzvah of chinuch is also upon the mother, and that Gimel, although I don't have it here, goes to the Machzis HaShekel, who's also one of the commentaries in Orach Chaim and Shulchan Aruch. Right, so you have, seems like the Gemaras are indicating a woman is not, but you have Rashi and you have Achronim who believe that a woman is. Now, what do you do with that Gemara in Nazir? That's a good question. So I brought you the last source. Is the Shut Bitzel HaChachma. That is Rabbi Bitzalel Stern, who a 20th century survivor, went to Israel. But just to keep in mind, this is not a liberal, feminist arguer. This is a Haredi guy. This is and a big Talmud Chacham. And he quotes, it. I'm not going to read it inside, but he first quotes it to Tiferes Yaakov, who says that only, right, maybe why isn't this, right, in a mitzvah that she's not obligated in per se, like Nazirus, she doesn't have to be mechanech her children, right? What is in that? Could a woman become a Nazir? You betcha.
Yeah.
You betcha, because the Torah says, ish o isha, ki afli, etc. But it is not, a mitzvah of Nazir is not something you must do. There is no mitzvah that you must become a Nazir. If you want to be a Nazir, here are the rules. Right? It is what we call a mitzvah kiyumit. It is a mitzvah that you may perform, but it is not a mitzvah that you must perform. So he says, okay, maybe with those kind of mitzvahs, so we don't put it upon the mother, but a mitzvah that a child must perform, right? Maybe the mother is obligated there too. And then he says even more than that, and he quotes from a tshuva of the Imre Shefer, that the Gemara seems to be talking about the mitzvah of Nazir specifically, right? That maybe, and it continues, maybe because there is karbanos, etc. And then he goes on and says that really, right, what we said before, that Rav Yochanan does not agree to Reish Lakish, and that of course a mother is obligated in the in the chinuch of her children. Right. Where does that leave us? Right. The funny thing is that in reality, de facto, who is the one? Even though we're in the 21st century, and we are, right, liberated Jews, who is the one who is the primary raiser of our children?
The mother.
It's the mother, right? It's still probably the mother, right? So we can have a theoretical argument about whether the mother is obligated in the chinuch of her children. De facto, at the end of the day, right, she's probably the one that's doing it. And as I mentioned from the outset, even if, again, it's nice to see Rashi and some of the other Achronim, arguing for the position that a woman is obligated in the chinuch of her children, especially since it's happening anyways. But even without a specific chinuch, obviously it's a tremendous thing to do, and there is much reward. With that, I guess that is the end of the tshuva. I'm happy to take any questions or wish everyone a good night.
The only thing I was thinking about in the Ben Sora or Mora, it's both the mother and the father that have to bring the child to the Sanhedrin. So you can see that it's not just the father, it's the mother and the father. So you can see they have to come to the same voice. So you can see there is a combination responsibility, but mother and the father in terms of chinuch of the child.
Fascinating. So that is a fascinating question. The question that I would say respond with is, that's true if mother and father have to come because they failed in the chinuch of their children, and therefore they have to bring them. Right. The other possibility is that the Torah doesn't really want Ben Sora or Mora to happen, so it puts as many obstacles in the way to prevent it from happening. How do you do that? Force the mother and father to come and bring their kid to be stoned. Right? If that's the case, it might have less to do with chinuch than sparing the child. But it might well have to do with it, right? Depending on how we see it. On that first view, which is they fail, therefore they must bring him, 1,000%, right? I like the other one only because I'm always taken with this idea that both the Torah and the Chachamim put into place restrictions to ensure that it would never happen. Because we can't never know how, right? So Sid, you also mentioned that they have the same voice, right? That's a rabbinic drasha, and they have to look the same. They've essentially legislated it out of existence, unless you married your identical twin, right? It's very hard to find a husband and wife who are married who look the same and sound the same. That'd be kind of cool and a little freaky. Sorry, how long are you married?
Oh, us, yeah, and we look exactly alike.
You look very much alike, yes. This striking how similar you look. No, I'm just saying, like,
You see pictures of it sometimes of the people. who
I don't know.
seem to be growing to
With
look
the
alike.
dogs.
okay, but
I'll
I'm
put
at
it
I'm
up,
at
yeah.
26 years and I've been married the least number of years from everyone on Zoom and sitting here in this room. And I know all of your spouses and I don't see, I just don't see it. I could be wrong, but I don't see it, right? But I think that's a whole different discussion that we could have,
Right.
Sid, but I think that's so fascinating, right? That they almost legislated it out. But there could very well be the idea that they failed and they're responsible. That would be another support that both the mother and the father. Again, I like the idea that the mother's obligated because you're both parents and you have to, this is your obligation to your children. It seems to make sense. Again, this is the kind of halachic underpinning of the discussion. Shkoach.
Thank you.
My pleasure. See everyone next week.